Hello and welcome to the Villa Park podcast. It's me, Rich, and I'm back with a very, very special show. I have Charlie here, who is uh, otherwise known as Academy AVFC on X or Twitter, and he's going to talk us through all the goings on at Aston Villa Academy. Tell you about the season that they've had, talk around the loan players, and talk about some potential future stars, and also talk about the coverage or lack of coverage for the youth side that we hope to improve as next season goes on. But first of all, before we get into that, we are marching on to 4,000 subscribers. We're literally 60 away as we speak. So please do hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button, and get involved in the comments, your thoughts on the academy, the youth players, and who you think could be a potential future star. So without further ado, Charlie, how you doing, mate? Great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, as we were saying off recording, there, it's good to be doing some more stuff, talking about the academy and something that I should really be doing more of. So good to be here and ready to talk about everything going on at Bodymore Heath.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, as I said to you earlier, you do a great service keeping everyone up to date on the Villa Academy and what's going on there. And we're going to talk about the coverage of or lack of coverage that the academy potentially gets. And we know it's going to get a little bit more high profile next season with the UEFA Youth League, etc., etc. But first of all, before we get into all of that, just round up the season for us for the academy, talking around the under 21s, the under 18s. How have they got on this season?
So I think starting with the most high profile, almost senior age group, the under 21s, they snuck into the playoffs on the final day. The Premier PL2 changed format this season into I think they call it the Swiss League, so kind of mirroring what we'll get in the Champions League next season, where the top 16 teams qualify for the next stage, and then it becomes a knockout tournament.
Right.
So we snuck in on the final day with a win at Newcastle, and then moved into a last 16 game against Tottenham, who are obviously seeded one, having finished top of the PL2 table, and in fact have just won the tournament. So that tells you that we weren't successful. But by all accounts, it was a pretty good performance in the game against Spurs, and we were on the wrong end of a couple of tight decisions, and it could have turned out quite differently. And obviously, look at the impact it could have had on the outcome in PL2.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a fairly successful one there. I think at the start of the season, you would have said qualifying for the playoffs in PL2 is the aim. They did that. EFL Trophy, I think, was quite an unlucky campaign. We picked up, as far as I remember, one penalty shootout win against Sutton, and failed to qualify again, just merely based on the fact that we only won that game on penalties. We led in that game, got pegged back late on, won on penalties, but you only pick up the 2 points for that as opposed to the 3, which left us without a chance of qualification on the final day. So yeah, we had a couple of close matches in that competition, and so that's the one I'm kind of looking at as the best barometer as to where players are at. Sometimes PL2 can get a bit more experimental. Perhaps I'm not sure whether this is the case, but perhaps it's taken a little bit less seriously. Whether that's the same with the coaching staff as it is the players.
Yeah. I would. I mean, we'll talk on under 18s in a second, but yeah, I would always say that within academy football, and this is why it's so important for them to go out on loan. There's a balance between, is it about the development of these players? How many of them realistically are going to go on to progress into not only the first team at Aston Villa, but first team careers, or how many of them are part of a under 21 squad that is just playing the games to fulfill the fixtures? And that's, I guess, the balance in terms of the seriousness of the competitions. Yet when they're playing against first team, proper teams, the EFL Trophy, or going out on loan, when games that matter, that's where it really comes to the crunch for these young players.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of mirrors the reputation the FA Youth Cup has in academy systems, and a lot of players see that as the most high profile tournament to sort of make a name for themselves and get themselves into the thoughts of coaches. So yeah, cup competitions are a good barometer of where the players are at, and it adds a bit more edge to the games when you're playing for something. One more cup competition that we featured in this season is the Premier League Cup, and there's a bit of a running theme here. We lost to Tottenham in that one in the quarterfinal. Another close game. Sort of pushed them all the way, and then they, from what I recall, they scored late on with about 10 minutes to go. And obviously Spurs have dominated in the under-21 competitions this season. So again, pushing a high-quality opponent really far is a demonstration of just the talent that we've got. A pretty successful campaign in that one. We topped our group pretty comfortably. Wins over Brighton, Swansea and Hull. And Brighton, a very strong under-21 outfit. So that's not to be sniffed at.
Yeah.
In terms of goals, Kobe Moore was the top scorer in that run. In PL2, I think off the top of my head, it will be pretty similar. Let's have a look. Yeah, Kobe Moore was the top scorer with 9. Omari Kellyman picked up 7. And next after that was, when I find it, Kyrie Pierre picked up 4 goals.
Okay.
And so, yeah, kind of not surprising that your striker is the leading scorer in the competition, but Kellyman picked up a lot of goals from playing that sort of second striker role or wide. And yeah, I think all in all for the under-21s, I think they can look back on a pretty successful season. Not successful when you think about sort of what you've won at the end of it. Obviously,
Yeah.
just in them in the Hong Kong Sevens. And I think they will have wanted a bit more. Obviously, they did pick up some silverware at the end of the season in the Birmingham Senior Cup, and that's the first time we've won that competition since 1985.
Nice.
With a
That
9-0
was a big
win in
win
the
as well,
final.
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, 9-0
Yeah.
over Racing Club Warwick. And there was a couple of tight games throughout that one, a couple of penalty shootout wins. And so, again, as we were saying before, it's a good barometer of where, when you add that competitive edge to the games, you maybe see a different side of the players. And I was really impressed going into a couple of those Birmingham Senior games with some of the performances from some of the players where they stepped up and really made a difference. So yeah, the 21s I think can look back and say, like I said, pretty successful. Development-wise, I think we've seen some new names come forward, and then we'll talk about those later. But yeah, definitely we've seen some new names come forward. It's no longer just about your Omari Kellyman or the players people already knew about, your Lamar Bogard, your Josh Feeney, your Tommy O'Reilly, who have been the top performers at that level. In terms of the under-18s, a mixed season, and I always am a bit too minded when it comes to talking about the under-18s and what is perceived as success, because I don't think league position is necessarily what they're using as a barometer there, because this is the breeding ground for players who get picked up and go into the PL2 team, the under-21s.
Sure.
And we see Rory Wilson as the prime example. Rory Wilson was banging in goals for the first half of the season, something stupid like 3 or 4 hat tricks.
Yeah.
And then he sort of gets pulled away halfway through the season, features a lot more in the under-21s, and the results drop off a little bit. There's a bit of misfortune with injuries. So Charlie Lutz picked up an ACL injury at the back end of last season and consequently missed a lot of this. He was one of the lead performers for the under-18s last season. And then on top of that, we've had injuries to players that have sort of mixed between the under-18s and 21s. Ben Brodjo is another one who's missed a bit of time this season. And so, yeah, I don't think we can say successful or unsuccessful. In terms of league position, I believe they finished second bottom of the under-18 Premier League. I'll just bring it up. 12th out of 13. But that was taking into account a pretty awful second half of the season. A lot of those points picked up were in the first half of the season. Big wins over Spurs, big win over West Brom, 7-1. And then at the back end of the season, only 1 point, it looks like, out of the last sort of 10, 12 games, and that game against West Brom as well. So, like I said, it's a bit more experimental. It's a bit more about bringing through your under-16 players who haven't had the experience. And I think we'll look back and there will be lessons learned for those players who have featured heavily for the under-18s. I know a lot of them have just come through their first season in the under-18 Premier League. So that's definitely a developmental thing to be looking at and looking for players to improve.
Yeah, you've got to look at the age bandings with those and the kind of the group that they're coming through with. Are they first year scholars, second year scholars, or even kind of third year scholars in terms of how their development is? So if there's a number of younger players that could theoretically be under 17s, then they're going to benefit from that grounding this season to push into next season. And then you couple that with losing your best players, so to speak, to the under 21s, then it's gonna compound that even more. Was it a situation where Villa had more younger players in both age groups this year? Did they have more kind of younger players in featuring for the under 21s, coincidentally then meaning that more younger players would feature for the under 18s?
A bit of a mix. So there's a couple of players who definitely are a bit more experienced and won't be eligible for the under-18s next season who have been featuring this year. Luca Lynch is one that's had some under-21 exposure. Definitely one that I think they have higher hopes for in terms of that step between 18s and 21s. But then on top of that, you've got players who have been coming in from the under-16s. Mm-hmm. Players, I'm trying to think of some names now off the top of my head. But yeah, there's been players, as I say, making that step. TJ Carroll, who's a defender, Ashton McWilliams, another defender. And I think this is the thing in under-18 football where you don't have a consistent lineup.
Yeah.
And there's partnerships not really growing. I get a few replies sometimes saying, the younger age groups don't know how to defend, and I don't think it's as linear as that. It's about consistency of lineup. The way you build a strong defense is through partnerships, and there isn't that consistency in age group football a lot of the time. And funnily enough, that links back into the under 21s. They had an upturn in performance in the second half of the season after a lot of players went out on loan, and then that became a consistent lineup. They were able to form partnerships, form a bit more understanding, and we saw a big benefit in results with the under 21s. Definitely a blend of players who will be looking to make that step up next season, but also players who have just made the step up from the under 16s.
Sure. No, excellent, and thanks for the rundown. So bridging that gap between the under 21s and the first team is, and even players within that under 21 setup, is going out on loan. And I mentioned to you before coming on the pod, you don't realise the number of players that have been out on loan, particularly like some of the young players that have gone to Real Union. You're talking Philip Marshall, you're talking Sinisalo, Sousa, Ben Krazine, Seb Revan, Louis Barry, Rico Richards, Kerr Smith, so many players that are out on loan. How would you sum up, not going through every player, but how would you sum up, sort of some of the big headline makers and I guess some of the ones who haven't quite lived up to expectation as well?
So definitely a mixed bag with some of the loanees. As we were saying there, with the two age groups, the under 21s and under 18s, there's a couple there who have suffered from injury and so haven't had or been able to make the impact that they would have hoped for when getting their loan move. So Tommy O'Reilly, Kerr Smith didn't feature all that much because they picked up injury pretty quickly. After joining their loan clubs. I talk a bit with people close to Kerr Smith, and from what I can gather, he was firmly in St Johnstone's plans. Picked up a hamstring injury when he joined, and sort of managed it for a period. Got into the first team, and then that became a tear, and that put an end to his loan spell. On the flip side, you've got the more successful, the headline makers. Viyami Sinisalo probably comes away as the lead performer. 6 awards he picked up at the Exeter end of season awards. I think
Yeah,
4 of those were.
that's crazy. That's
So,
crazy.
well, it's inflated because I think 4 were like sponsors player of the year,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
don't do. But yeah, I think he picked up players player and supporters player, which are obviously 2 nice awards to come away with. A lot of clean sheets. I think it was something like 12 or 13 clean sheets that he picked up in League One. So yeah, a real success story. Exeter fans have been begging for him to come back. They had a chance in 1 more year, Sinisalo. So I don't think you can say that was anything other than a success.
Yeah.
Further to that, another keeper that's really impressed. He finished his season yesterday, Olivier Zich. Really impressed in Pushka Neopolomitsa's first Polish league, Polish top division in the Ekstraklasa. It was their debut season, and he helped them achieve their goal of survival. Received a nomination for goalkeeper of the year. I believe the awards are tomorrow, so we'll find out whether he was successful there. But again, to come away with such a nomination tells a story of the success you've had in a team that would have been among the favourites for relegation. So alongside that, he's just received his first Poland under-21 call-up, has been the under-20 captain. And so the national recognition only tells one story there. He's definitely among the thoughts, he's highly thought of back in his home country of Poland. On the theme of international call-ups, Viliami Sinisalo made his international debut this season.
Yeah.
Started in a friendly, started against San Marino in a Euro qualifier. And so again, that's only going to add, if it's value to the player, if we're looking at a different thought process as to bringing through players, it's only going to add value in that area. But also it proves to us just what they're capable of and how highly thought of they are within their national setups. I think another success story we could probably mention is Louis Barry. Prior to his injury, he was tearing up League Two.
Yeah, yeah.
Had something silly like 7 goals in 7 games.
Yeah.
Was on his way.
A record or something for Stockport.
Yeah, I think he was on his way to breaking a record. I'm not sure whether he broke it in the end. To be honest, it's a long time ago. I don't remember, but he's another one who I think picked up a hamstring injury, which ruled him out until the final couple of games of the season. Obviously, Stockport went on and got promoted. I've seen some good reviews of Rico Richards, who was also there. There's a bit of a partnership forming there between Stockport and Villa.
Yeah.
Arjun Reiki was one that went on loan there. Came back with nice words. Obviously, Louis Barry's been there a couple of times. Now Rico Richards, and they seem to be doing well. And so I think where you can sort of develop that trust with clubs that the players you're producing are worth using up a loan spot on, then that can only be a benefit going forward when we've got players coming through who are looking to make those moves. And then, yeah, I think once we take those out of the equation, it's a bit of a mixed bag. And that's what you're going to get, really, with youth players making their first loan moves is a lot of it can rely on the setup that you're going into, a different style of football, but also you're going into different situations where results ultimately mean more. And one of the big things I've always sort of looked at loan moves with is I think sometimes managers have a bit of a trap that they fall into of trusting their more experienced players, and so loan players who go into whether it be a Stockport or Philip Marshall at an MK Dons is that the first sign of struggling, they get pulled from the team. And making an early impact is really important with those players when they go into these loan sides. And if you don't make that loan impact, it's sometimes a struggle to then get back into the team or pick up better minutes than lots of the late sub appearances.
Yeah, it's so much rides on it, and you're dead right with kind of that early impression, because if you don't do that, then you kind of get lost in on the bench or lost in the squad. It, you're obviously then with younger players as well in that dressing room. It's building the trust from the other players, the more experienced players as well. That manager could be under pressure. He then gets sacked. Another manager comes in,
Mm-hmm.
thinks, "Who are these players on loan? I'll just get rid of them. I need to bring in my own people." And very quickly can become a little bit of a nightmare. And that's the situation. However, you always learn from all experiences, and some players do well out of the fact that they had a nightmare loan period. Some players do well out of the fact they've had a brilliant loan period. It's all about the character and what you take from the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see a couple of examples of that. Ben Crizine had a good loan at Kilmarnock last season, which was ended early through injury. He's gone into Blackburn and had that same predicament where a managerial change has happened. You've got to work through into a different manager's thoughts and came away with some positive performances. One of the ones was televised against Newcastle in the FA Cup. And yeah, it helped Blackburn towards a final day
Survival. Yeah,
maintenance
and
of their
helping
championship status.
Birmingham City go down in the process.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
there's a couple of examples like that throughout our loan contingent, and Lino Souza is another one that came in. There was a manager in place, manager gets sacked, and then all of a sudden you find yourself out of the equation. And so, with that being his first loan in professional football, it'll definitely be something to learn from and to use if he goes again on loan next season, or to maybe keep in mind whether that's something to do with the way that he's training, tactical things that he can pick up and use when he comes back to Villa in pre-season.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Before we get on to kind of your like views on the coverage of the youth team, I think it's probably good to kind of keep on this kind of scope with regards to the players who've been on loan and the potential players that could go out on loan next season. What do you see with that? How do you see some of the players that have gone through the 18s into the 21s? I'm talking the Rory Wilsons here potentially. How do you see them going on next season? Do you see more players going out on loan? And the ones that have been out on loan, what do you see with them in terms of potential transfer value? Because we've obviously utilized a strategy where we've sold some of these players on who've had good loan spells. So yeah, I guess it's a two-part question there. What do you see with some of the players who the younger players to potentially go out on loan next season, gain that experience, and the ones who've been on loan, do you see us cashing in on some of those moving forward?
I think definitely there's been a bit of a shift in philosophy at Villa, and it's that attraction to what is considered as pure profit. So players that have been organically produced through the academy, definitely, I think the club are a lot more open to selling those at an earlier stage than perhaps we would have done. Whereas I think a lot of academy players in the past have sort of tended to see out their contracts, they get released, and then they move on to other clubs, and that's how they form their career.
Yeah, that's been one of the well, some people would see it as a mistake that Villa have made. I think of the likes of Callum O'Hare and players like that we didn't that were buzzing around the first team, but then we let go and then have gone on to good careers that we maybe could have made money off. So
Mm.
I understand that strategy.
And I think what we have to factor into that is that this is a different Villa to the one that Callum O'Hare came through in.
Yeah,
Callum O'Hare, we kind of got sucked into a bit of a trap with him. We were in the Championship. It's maybe a little easier to bring through, or get sucked into believing that you can bring through a player in the Championship. And yeah, definitely, I think the club can look back at that and take lessons. as you say, Callum O'Hare will have been one that I think if you look at his stock now within football, it looks like he's going to be moving on a free, but he's definitely got high stock. He's got a lot of clubs that are interested in him, and I think that perhaps would have been the same at the time that he left Villa. And so, yeah, I think the club are definitely, and football in general, are seeing this trend towards maybe getting to a point of maximum value with a lot of academy players. And so, whether that be a Louis Barry this summer, there's talk of a permanent move to Stockport. If we can pick up an okay fee for him, I think the club will see that as something that they're happy to take. But also the flip side of that is that Louis Barry as a player, it's at a stage in his career with his age, 19, 20, where you want to be making that decision. You want a permanent home where you're going to be playing professional minutes, and can Villa offer that to a player at this stage who's had injury difficulties, but has been a little bit perhaps inconsistent up until recently in his professional career. Then, as I say, I'm not sure whether Villa would be prepared to take that risk, considering our status within the Premier League now in the Champions League. So yeah, definitely, I think the club will be looking to cash in where possible on players of a certain age, where it's no longer about development. It's about, this is your career now. You need to go and make a career. I think Seb Revan is probably going to be another one.
Yeah.
Where if we pick up an offer of maybe 2 or 3 million, perhaps less, we'll be happy to. And that's no slight on the players. If anything, it might even be perceived as a positive thing for them. Like I say, you, at the end of the day, you want to be a professional player that goes and makes a professional career. And I think in the situations that the Villa first team will end up in, I think we're going to see less and less opportunities become available to academy players where you're fighting for top four, whether it could even be higher than top four. And it comes back to that similar conversation.
Yeah,
it comes back to that similar conversation as to the difficulties loan players will have, is that really Villa are trying to build a squad that perhaps only has one or two gaps for youth players who have the potential to fit in. And so it becomes even tougher for certain players to make that jump. So yeah, a couple of names I mentioned there, Barry, Revan. Definitely the club will be looking at potentially trying to move on. In terms of players, maybe. Cuisine's a funny one, because when Gerrard was in charge, he featured in a couple of Premier League squads. He's definitely got all of the tools to be a high level fullback. The question with Ben has always been about withstanding the physical rigors. It seems to be a case. So I mentioned his Kilmarnock loan earlier, that broke down due to an injury. And so if he can develop a bit more of a continuation of physical fitness, I'll be interested to see where Villa go with him. Perhaps there'll be a bit of an opening at left back across the summer, although saying that, we've bought in Lino Souza, so maybe a bit of a backlog there. So that could be an interesting one to watch over the summer, how things transpire. And then we mentioned players that potentially will be going out on loan next season. I've seen some talk already about the possibility of Amari Kellyman moving to possibly Luton. So there's some talk about, as part of the Barkley deal, there's some agreement between the clubs that they'll have first dibs on some of our loan players. So that'd be a good opportunity for Kellyman to go and get some professional games under the belt, if that were to happen. But yeah, Kellyman's definitely one who's going to benefit from playing as much football as possible. This is the weight you have to balance when you're in charge of an academy player coming through. Kellyman probably actually hasn't played as much football as he would have wanted this season, because he's always in that limbo between you're the top under
Traveling with the
21.
first team
Yeah,
squad. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Not getting minutes, but doing the first team prep
yeah.
and stuff like that.
And
Yeah, it's a
the
difficult one.
schedule of PL2 is a bit difficult to negotiate in that sense, because potentially you play a Friday game, Premier League game on a Saturday or Sunday, so you can't play the Friday game because you're traveling with the first team, and then you end up traveling with the first team, sitting on the bench, and then you come away with no minutes of football that week. And so, yeah, I think a loan would definitely be on the cards for someone like Omari. A couple of names who have made debuts recently, so Finn Monroe,
Yeah.
I think would be an interesting one. He's definitely one who has talents that can be utilised in the professional game. So I think he's potentially seen as a little bit more, how to put this, a bit of a hard man. So he puts in a hard tackle. You get full commitment from him for 90 minutes. But then on top of that, he's got a good delivery to boot. So quite an old-fashioned fullback in that sense. So potentially suitors will be interested in taking him on loan. Beyond that, we've
I've
got
heard
players that
rumours about Caden Young to go into the Bundesliga. Is there anything in
I've
that?
seen that as well. It would be an interesting one. I'd hope it would be on loan.
Yeah.
He again is someone that flirted with Premier League inclusion. First of all under Gerrard, but then he had that big, almost breakout performance in the Villarreal friendly when Emery had just joined. So again, someone who has had a bit of a mixed season due to injury, and towards the back end of the season was motoring. So yeah, if we can utilise the Bundesliga market as somewhere to send players like other clubs have previously, I can remember West Ham sending players to Augsburg. Definitely, that's something I would be interested in, particularly with someone like Caden who's had that taste of first team exposure. And yeah, the Bundesliga is definitely somewhere that can be seen as a bit more of a nurturing league for players in those attacking positions. I'd really be interested in that, because again, I think the difficulty we're going to have is what's his access to minutes going to be, and I think in a majority of cases it's going to be minimal. I think one of the things actually to factor in here is how the club approach qualification for the UEFA Youth League. Whether there's a bit more of a reluctance to send so many players on loan because there's going to be more fixtures for them to play. The Youth League is a different experience as well, so you're going to be exposed to different footballing styles, different tactics, different referees, and that's all beneficial to a player's development. So I'll be interested to see whether they look at maybe keeping a core group that they want to be exposed to that. So that could mean a Munro, that could mean a Lino Souza, who might benefit from playing all of those games, although saying that he will have had similar exposure at Arsenal. But yeah, I think that's something that will be part of the equation when thinking about players that are going to go on loan.
Nice. So, in terms of, I guess, the player who is, other than Kellyman, who's done well when he's appeared in the first team, but the player who's kind of grabbing the headline, so to speak, in the youth side is Rory Wilson. And I mentioned that I thought he might make a first team squad before the end of the season. There was talk of him potentially being in there for the Palace game. I don't think he made it in the end, but he's he's had a 5-year contract offered to him. However, clubs in the names of like Inter Milan, one or two other clubs, I think over in Germany as well, have been interested in him. What's the latest with Rory Wilson, and is he kind of the big hope at the moment in terms of the Villa Academy?
It's an interesting one. I think sometimes the reception that he gets on social media is a bit ahead of where his progression is at. So you can see Just from the teams that he's represented this season, it was largely the under 18s to begin with, and then he's had a bit more of a substitute role with the under 21s. I think you can see from that opinion that perhaps he's not as far forward in terms of first team selection as people might think he is. I think what you have to temper his goal numbers with is that doesn't necessarily always translate to men's football. And I think what I've seen from the academy games that, or particularly the under 21 games that he featured in towards the end of the season, is that it looks like they're trying to develop his game and become a player that isn't seen as it's the wrong phrase to use, but like a tapping merchant.
Yeah.
So he started some games playing as a number 10 and developing that sort of link up role. And that's definitely somewhere where he has the ability to grow. Undeniably, you can't argue with his goal numbers, his finishing, his ball striking. That's all clearly there. But I think what you have to remember is there's numerous examples of players coming through academies. You can look at Liam Delap as an example at Man City, who came through with a big,
broke all the records.
And was scoring goals for fun. Came through, had a couple of first team appearances at City, and sort of almost didn't match up to the hype that he came through with. So, I'm a bit in two minds with Rory Wilson. I'm not sure he's as close as people think he is, but equally you can't argue with what he's producing so far. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him this season. As we've all seen on Twitter, there's a lot of talk about whether he's going to take this contract, whether there's a move elsewhere coming up. So perhaps we'll know more towards the end of the summer. Whether that leads to a loan move, if he's still at Villa, then absolutely that's something that he can benefit from, and would be attractive to Villa.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we record this Sunday evening, we watched the Hong Kong Sevens, and Kobe Moore, watching him up front, he looks quite physically mature. And one or two of the other players who were playing in that game look quite, physically strong. And I guess that's with regards to young players and whether they can push for that first team. It's unfortunately it has to be about pace and physicality, and the ability to do what you can do, like the ability to show your technical skills when you're under physical pressure from a grown adult. And if you can't do that, you're not gonna, if it's taking you time to develop that, then you're not gonna prosper at first team level. But yeah, it's interesting. See, Moore looks quite physically strong. Like, I don't know whether you see that in him.
Yeah, absolutely. They're different types of strikers. Moore becomes a bit more of a hold-up guy, and he allows us to play a different way of the team. But you can almost sort of sit back in and defend and know you have an out ball. And there's been a couple of times where I've watched Rory Wilson. The first time was in the FA Youth Cup a couple of seasons ago against Southampton, which we lost. But that was an area that we struggled. We didn't really have an out ball, and obviously Wilson provides the goal scoring threat, but wasn't able to link into midfield successfully. So it just ended up being a case of throwing the ball back to Southampton, and they picked us off in the end. But yeah, as you say, it can be about physical maturity and that sort of physical readiness. You have to temper that with progression not necessarily being linear. People mature at different ages. And I think, having previously mentioned Louis Barry, that he might be someone who has a little bit of a later development than other players who make that breakthrough. You can see Omari Kellyman. He's got a big frame, and you think to yourself, when he sort of fills that frame out, he's going to be difficult to handle with his technical ability. And so, yeah, it's like you say, it's an interesting aspect to sort of take in as part of a player's progression. And it almost becomes a bit cutthroat and a bit sad to see, really,
Mm,
that players with such high technical ability, such good skill, miss out because they don't have the physical attributes at that stage where the decision is made.
yeah,
Yeah, you mentioned Kobe Moore, Lamar Bogard, again, someone with a high level of technical ability. He's reached that sort of decision age, I call it, where he's at an age where he needs to be playing football one way or another. Whether Villa can offer him that opportunity, I'm not sure, but he's definitely someone that will, because of his profile, his calmness on the ball, his physical attributes, where he's strong, and really his ability to read the game. He can play as a DM, he can play as a centre back, and so he's got a profile that will be attractive to clubs. I've seen rumours of Arzad Alkmaar potentially being interested in Lamar. And I think at times like that, you kind of have to see the bigger picture for these players. As I say,
yeah,
he's at an age where he needs to be playing football. RZ would be a good move if it were to transpire, because he's uh, not only going into a country that's his home country, but also the Eredivisie, the uh, the scope of teams that you can play against. You can be playing against your Feyenoord, your PSVs, your Ajaxes one week, but then you play against a lower quality opposition, and so it gives you a lot of room to grow as a player, and you learn different ways to play against different oppositions. That would be really beneficial for someone like Lamar, who, as I say, really needs that exposure to consistent minutes.
yeah. I agree, 100%. Um, with regards to Unai Emery, let's talk about the top dog. How do you feel he views the youth team and the youth setup at Aston Villa?
It's an interesting one. I got asked a similar question recently, and I think it's mixed, because I think some people sort of say that he's got a bit of a reputation for bringing through youth players. At Arsenal, he gave Saka his debut. Um, I think he played a part in Emile Smith Rowe's development.
Yeah, yeah. Martinelli as well, I think.
Martinelli, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So on one hand, you can look at that on the face of things and say undeniably he's got a track record. I think sometimes managers also get forced into making those decisions. The example I gave when I was asked this question is Marcus Rashford.
mm,
Marcus Rashford kind of fell into his opportunity because of an injury crisis. I think a similar thing happened with Saka, where Arsenal was struggling for numbers. He got an opportunity in a European game. So I don't know whether you can attribute that to Emery giving a player a break, or a break sort of becoming available to a player.
yeah,
Um, it's difficult to say, but what we have seen is that in times where opportunities are available, he's not afraid to put the players in. So we saw at Zrinski, Philip Marshall started in goal. Tommy O'Reilly made his debut. We've seen Seb Revan start in Europe. We've seen
yeah,
Omari Kellyman start in Europe, and I think the sort of the short version is, if you're good enough and you make an impression, then absolutely you'll get an opportunity. I think our squad size um, lends itself to that as well,
yeah,
particularly this season. We've had some often 2 or 3 spots that have been available for academy players who are making that impression to get experience on the bench. And then in Europe, we've seen them get opportunities. We saw Finley Monroe come on for the latter stages against Olympiacos. We saw Kane Kessler-Hayden come on in that same game and make his Premier League debut this season. So yeah, I think if you're good enough to make an impression and sort of hang in there in first team training, um, absolutely, I think Emery is the kind of manager that will reward that. The caveat I need to I probably need to address the elephant in the room is Lander Emery being on the bench in the final game of the season. And I think I can say all those things about being good enough and you get an opportunity. But if you've got a situation in which a manager is empowered to sort of forego the academy setup to put his son on the bench, then perhaps we need to reduce our expectations for academy players getting so much exposure. But as I say, I wouldn't necessarily blame Emery for that. I blame the 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 situation or the hierarchy that we've created for Emery feeling empowered to make that decision. So I don't have a problem with him doing it so much, but I have a problem with the system for allowing him to feel like he can make that decision.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but saying that, it was a dead rubber. It was the last game of the season.
Perhaps they
Um,
were all going on holiday afterwards, and he just
yeah,
needed to get
and
into the airport quick with the
yeah,
family.
well, and players were going to Hong Kong. So James Wright's been on the bench
Yeah.
a couple of times this season. He obviously went to Hong Kong, but I think they flew the day after the Palace game. So that's one something to add into the equation. A couple of the other goalies were in Germany for an under-18s tournament.
Hmm.
Sam Proctor and Reece Oakley, and I believe Sam Lewis were all over in Germany. So a situational thing that came about led to this sort of headline making decision. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out next season. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it will.
Obviously, factoring in the fact that we've got high level fixtures to add into our calendar in the Champions League, there's going to be even more um, pressure on finishing as high as possible because of the well documented financial constraints that we sort of have to adhere to. Um, so it's there's moving cogs, and I think it's hard to put a definitive answer on what Emery's philosophy is in terms of bringing academy players through. But I would be confident to say if you are good enough to make an impression, you will feature in his plans.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think in a lot of ways you bang on. You know, he's played the likes of Kellyman. He's talked up a few players particularly like the younger ones. But what's
Mm-hmm.
been interesting is the likes of Bonham and maybe even Kessler Hayden, when they came back off loan, he talked of them being, you know, needing to be ready when called upon, and he needs to rely on these players because he sent other players out on loan. But he was very reluctant to use them, particularly, I guess, the pressure of trying to finish in the Champions League and things like that. But I don't know what the future holds for those two players in particular. And also, what we've seen is when he's brought in he's signed the likes of Morgan Rogers, a young player who's had first team experience, albeit in the Championship, but has had that experience at a fairly high level. Nedeljkovic is coming in, had experience at a higher level. Is that an area where he's going to go for players that have had first team experience at age 18, 19? Then he can bring them in and maybe fast track them a little bit more than, say, someone like you said before who's had under 21s experience but not necessarily got used to the physicality of the Premier League.
So yeah, it's a funny one. The couple of names you mentioned there in Tim Bunham and Kane Kessler Hayden, I think they would have been encouraged when they saw those quotes from Emery saying that you've got to be ready. The opportunities will come. Like you say, I think it then leads to a bit of disappointment, particularly as a fan, where we're not privy to the conversations that are happening behind closed doors between the players and the manager. But yeah, I think, as you say, the thing with Morgan Rogers is just the combination of attributes. He's got the physical power, but he's also got the technical ability. I kind of view him as an example for Omari Kellyman to look at,
Yeah,
and you say when Kellyman fills out, that's kind of the model of player that you're looking at. Yeah, it's kind of that same thought process as we were talking about before, where it's sometimes, unfortunately, the more physically ready players who get the opportunities, isn't it? And football can become a bit caveman like that, where the biggest player gets the opportunity.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, like you say, it's going to be very, very, very interesting to see what happens with those younger
Mhm.
players next season, be it in the youth. You don't want to get embarrassed in that competition. First time we've been in the Champions League as well. And how is he going to approach certain games? Is he going to go with a more youthful look for cup competitions, the domestic cup competitions, that type of thing? Does that mean he keeps more of those younger players around? Going to be very, very interesting to see. Now, just to kind of finish, close out the interview that we've got with you, and thank you so much for your time, Charlie. It's much appreciated. You potentially are the sole. We have one or two other Twitter accounts and one or two accounts on the club every now and again that give us updates, but you are the primary updater of the youth news and what's going on with youth players and loan players, etc., and got a really good following on X. But particularly this weekend, you've been quite vocal in sort of your criticism of the club and their lack of coverage of the youth players. And really, we're missing out on a trick here because so many supporters want to find out what's happening with the young players within their club, whether that be within the club in terms of interviews, in terms of features, or whether that be out on loan in terms of updates on how they're getting on. And yeah, just talk to us about how you're feeling about that at the moment.
So I think just to address the first point about becoming vocal this weekend, it's more not necessarily from a fans want to see this coverage perspective. I think there's an element of I almost feel like the players are getting a bit disrespected by the lack of coverage. You've got a set of players who have just finished their season, who have taken a 12-hour flight to go to Hong Kong. The only article that goes up is once they've completed the tournament. It's like, let the fans know that something's happening. Tell us what the squad is. Tell us which players have travelled over. Don't leave it to fans to sort of work it out for themselves. The way I found out is from a member of the Chinese Lions who's there at the tournament, sending me pictures of the players that came through the airport. We shouldn't
It was
have
a
to find
highly
out that way.
rated squad as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing. In previous seasons, it's been a bit more of a blend of under 18s and 21s. This season, it was a fully fledged under 21 lineup, players who are close to the first team. And like I said, I think the first thought is, as I say, show a bit of respect to the players. I think, but then secondly, just let the fans know, let the fans know where they can watch these players. People want to watch the players. People want to see the talent that's coming through. People want to see what types of players are coming through. There's a couple of names in that Hong Kong Sevens squad that people won't have seen. Charlie Lutz, Rico Richards has made a few appearances for the 21s before he went on loan, but again, they won't have seen so much of in a Villa shirt.
Mikhail Barnes, I was impressed with
Yeah,
him.
he's missed out a lot through injury this season. So again, it's an opportunity to pick up new names, pick up new ideas of what these players can offer. And the club was silent on it, and it irritates me because I think the players deserve a bit more exposure. The point that I think that I feel most passionately about is that really, as fans, we should be getting better. We should be getting better coverage than a single tweet on the day of a match saying that a match is happening and you can watch it live on Villa TV. We should be getting better coverage than winning the Birmingham Senior Cup and then there's nothing post match. The manager has been in the job for 6 months, Hosset Gombau, and there's not been a single interview with him on Villa TV, and it's like little things like that, things that where you can get a bit more of an idea of what the philosophy is within the academy. Um,
I totally agree. I mean, these are meant to be our stars of the future. Even if they were good, even if it was behind an additional paywall, if you had to pay an extra, I don't know, £2 a month for membership for behind the scenes access to under 21s interviews and training, like you think they're missing out on potential money for the club if they could
yeah.
do something like that. I mean, it just seems like basic 101 club information. You talk about the Tottenhams or the Man
Mhm.
Uniteds or the Liverpools. They've obviously got bigger profiles, Liverpool TV and Man United TV, but it just seems like basic stuff. Like fans across the world would pay a little bit extra money to find out what's going on behind the scenes, training, little bits of training features, interviews, player profiles. It just seems like basic 101 marketing of the club to me.
And then on top of that, I think you can raise the argument of giving global Villa fans a bit more access to the club.
Hmm.
People who don't have the comfort of living 20 minutes from Villa Park and can go and watch an under-21s game if they want to, or following a player on Instagram or something like that to find out what's happening and when. But there's so many layers to it, and so many ways in which I think something basic could improve the way that Villa cover the academy. The small caveat I always give when I talk about this is that there is the possibility that this is a decision from Villa,
Mm.
perhaps because they don't want the academy players to be as widely available as they could be. But I think that's going to happen in the day of social media anyway. I think on top of that, there's, like I said, there's so many layers to it. I think you can stretch this argument to the coverage that Villa give of the academy games. I think is really poor.
Hmm.
And it's not to blame Jack Woodward. He does a really good job on commentary and has developed a good understanding of the players. But the setup basically becomes rinse and repeat, game after game after game. It's here's the players. We don't know very much about the players. We're just going to commentate on a game of football and talk about the players that everyone knows about. And I think the club could really benefit from having someone that knows a bit more about the academy covering those games. Like, it doesn't always have to be about Amaro Kellyman being close to the first team. It could be someone providing punditry on those games who knows the players that they're watching. One of the players that I've loved this season is Jamal Jimo Aloba, and the kind of the only comments you get on the players are he scored last time and we were really impressed with him. It's like, just give us a bit more. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't have to
And
be
he's
so.
in the England under the 18s, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Well, this is the thing. We've got so many players in international age groups that again we just don't know about, and I have to be honest, I look at your tweets and that's where I get my updates from for the
mm.
young players, and in any game that's happening, that's where I'll get my updates from, and that's the honest truth.
I'm
And
going
I
to be
would love to
completely
see
honest.
more.
And it's stupid to admit this, but the job that I do, it's relatively easy to do. Like,
Mm,
and this is the thing that kind of sticks with me when I look at how poorly the club cover the academy, is that I do a lot of the stuff that I do just off apps that are available to everyone. I do it through looking at the England Twitter account when they're announcing squads and seeing what's happened, or searching social media when I see that a Villa player scored on international duty to find a clip of it. And it's something as simple as that that adds this different dimension into how someone is able to cover the academy. Um, and like I say, I think that's the thing that kind of sticks with me, is that I feel like what I do is not that complex, and the club could do this to whatever margin of difficulty more than they could than I currently do, and it would improve so many things. Like I say, it doesn't have to necessarily be about shop windowing players. It can be media training players. Give us an interview after a match. Give us essentially media training for the players. They're going to have to deal with this at some part of their career, and they're not really getting it at Villa. Like, have a post-match interview. The one that irked me is after the Senior Cup final. The club historically have treated it as an important tournament, and we win the cup, and that's it. The club just moves on, and we start tweeting about whatever else. And I just think that there's so much room for growth within the way the club demonstrates its academy, and sort of utilises the things that are available to them to cover it.
Yeah, 100% agree. Well, we're going to do our bit at Villa Park Podcast to support and to update on the youth academy. We're going to have you on, Charlie, once a month, or at least once a month where we can, to update us on results, loan watch, players that you think are going to make the name for themselves, and any other news, and get comments and questions in from our viewers. So we're going to definitely do our bit to keep people updated on the youth side, because I'm really interested in young players developing and how they come through, and I'm sure a number of our supporters, a number of our viewers are the same. Thank you so much for this wonderful interview, mate. Much appreciated. You do some great work on Twitter, or X as it is now known, and across all social media, keeping fans updated on the youth setup and what's going on. If you could give us one or two players who you believe, Charlie, are the stars of the future for Aston Villa. You've maybe given us a couple of hints as the interview's gone on, but yeah, short answer, one or two players. Who are the future stars that we need to look out for?
I think two players to watch next season. Jamal Gimo-Aloba, in a similar profile to Amari Kellyman, has that real cutting edge in the final third, physically dominant as well. I've loved watching him this season. It's been his first full season at Villa after joining from West Brom. He's been such a joy to watch for the under-21s. And then Tristan Rowe. Tristan Rowe is going to be a real interesting one to watch. I think he's one that has the potential to make that early breakthrough. Real dynamic fullback. He's played at centre back at times, but I see his future at fullback. Quick, a really good understanding for someone so young of the sort of subtleties of being a fullback, when to drop in, when to go, and a really good dribbling ability. He's got a real strong tendency to break into the final third, dribbling past two or three players, get to the byline. And so I think Tristan Rowe is a really interesting one to watch progress next season.
Fantastic. Well, guys, you heard it here first. Once again, Charlie, thank you so much. If anyone's been living under a rock, it is Academy AVFC on X. But yeah, please make sure you follow him. He gives us all the updates. Like I say, we're going to be doing these hopefully more regularly, once a month, to give you updates on the youth players with Charlie. So keep tuned with the channel. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your support. Charlie, thank you so much for coming on, mate. It is much appreciated. We'll be back with plenty more shows across the pre-season break, predominantly transfer news. I like doing that and seeing what's going on, but also updating you on anything else Villa related. But yeah, keep tuned to the channel. Thank you all for watching, and as always, remember, we'll follow the Villa.